Most of us tend to think of telephone boxes as being red things, a bit like this one up here. Now this is the classic British kiosk number 6, introduced in 1935 for the Silver Jubilee of King George V, and therefore nicknamed the Jubilee kiosk. Designed by the famous architect Sir Giles Gilbert Scott, it lasted for a very long while and was obviously a big part of the steam era layout. But moving forward, and I say forward, I mean it's not that much further forward nowadays, in 1980 British Telecom was born, and British Telecom came along and they said, we want something modern and thrusting and new and not made of cast iron. So they introduced the KX series, the KX 100 being the most popular kiosk in 1985, designed by David Carter Associates, and these gradually replaced the red telephone boxes in many bits of Britain. Now, they're a classic thing, very much part of the scene. And so if you're building a layout built in the 1980s, then you need to start thinking about a different type of telephone box. And that's what we're going to build today. There's only one method of building them that's really going to work in 4mm scale, and that is to use an etched brass kit. You're going to need metal work because you've got very, very thin bars and everything, and an awful lot of glazing. The kit I'm using is from Shire Scenes, and it's their S25 K100 telephone box kit. Now, it's a great kit for a beginner because, like a lot of the Shire Scenes kits, it is designed to be assembled with super glue. There you can see the main components of the kit quite nicely. We've got the main body of the telephone box, the inner bits, and a roof. They're all nicely laid out and they're all labelled on the sheet as well. You've got the inside bits and they go inside the telephone box, and there's letters on the etch as well to make life even easier. So the first thing we're going to need to do is cut the bits out from the etch. Now it's quite important, don't take bits off the etch until you need them. There are actually 2 telephone handsets included on this, so you can lose one, but all the others you're going to have to be a bit careful with. Removing bits from the etch is simple enough. You just need a reasonable size craft knife and cut through the little nibs that are holding it into the etched sheet. This is the main body, and you can just see there are little tabs left on the top there. These will need to be removed, and for larger tabs I tend to use a pair of cheap scissors. Alternatively, you can file the tabs off. Now always file along the etch. Don't file across. You'll actually make a dip into the etch. File along as far as possible and use the biggest file you can. I can't get that big file in there, so there's a little nib here. I'll just take that off with the needle file. Again, trying to work along the metal. Got my basic component. The next job is to fold it up. Now, the rule with etch kits is there will be what's called a half etched line on the inside of each part. I'm just bending the top edges of each piece over, and there you are, that's the top formed. And then we have to move on to making it into a box. Again, half etched lines, and in fact they're etched all the way through down most of the corners of the box, so that they will bend really, really easily. You could almost do this with your fingers, but it's much, much more sensible to do it with a flat pair of pliers, just so you support the metal as it's working. The box itself needs to be fixed together. Now you might think, oh, I'm going to have to do some break out of soldering iron, and indeed with many etch kits that is exactly what you've got to do. But these kits and many modern etch kits for small details are designed to go together with super glue. 2 ways of using super glue. The first is to have a big bottle of the stuff, pour a little bit onto a bit of plastic and pick it up with a small screwdriver or a pin. To be honest, for this sort of job, I prefer the brushable type super glues. Just run a little bit in the joint and then hold the joint in position. It just sets with the moisture, and there you are. That's my basic telephone box. There's also a roof which I'll stick on top, and for more fun and games, of course, you've also got all the interior parts to build, and these work in exactly the same way as the box. Smaller pair of pliers to bend this. This is actually the all-important telephone bit of the telephone box. And there we are, we've formed the basic box. Essentially, you cut out all the bits, glue them into position. There are some telephone signs to fit in the top edge. To be honest, I leave those out because they were transparent in real life, and I'll show you a finished model in a minute. I did say that these kits don't need to be primed, and it's absolutely right. They generally don't need to be primed. They're actually coated with a bit of varnish, which makes them impossible to solder unless you clean the varnish off, but it does mean that paint sticks to them remarkably well. Except that telephone boxes are silver, and they're actually made of stainless steel. But the problem is that silver isn't a colour that covers very, very well. So I've tried a couple of options. I very much like, for most metallic finishes, I rather like the Molten Metals range, which comes from airbrushes.com. That's an acrylic paint, works very, very nicely. But I actually, for telephone box work, prefer a pot of Humbrol aluminium colour, because it just seems to have the slight edge on covering. You might wonder why I'm painting a stainless steel telephone box aluminium. It's quite simply, it is because of the colour. The post office did try aluminium telephone boxes. The K7 or kiosk number 7 was built in aluminium, left outside for 3 months, and apparently the mess that it ended up in the British weather was appalling. So they decided after that they'd make the K8 in cast iron again. But by the 80s we moved on and we were using stainless steel. And the main problem with all metallic paints is that the particles are actually quite large, and that means you have to keep stirring the paint because the particles will drop out of the carrier and just sit in the bottom. By spraying my telephone box with grey primer, it gives me a really, really nice base colour to work with, so the silver paint doesn't have to do very much to cover the colour underneath. The design of the telephone box is such that most of the bars are aluminium colour, so I'm just going to whack a coat of aluminium over this, and I'll do the inside of the box as well. I'll leave it for at least 24 hours to dry. Here we have it. I've painted my telephone box. They're not desperately sophisticated colours telephone boxes. You've got a mostly silver, black edging around the inside of around the edges of the glass, just inside the bars where the plastic coated bits were to hold the glass. Yellow bar across the centre of the door. Now these varied. Yellow bars were initially introduced. They were the very first ones. Phone card boxes were green, and then in 1991 they changed the logo, so the British Telecom logo that's actually etched into the kit disappeared and was replaced with the Piper logo. Okay, the last job is to glaze the telephone box, and for this I am using some glazing that I picked up out of some plastic packing. I've cut it so it just slides inside the telephone box. Make sure it's a nice, good sliding fit before you do anything, because you've got to fit 3 of these. Then all we've got to do is stick it in place. Don't use super glue on clear plastic. The reason is, I mentioned that super glue sets by working with the moisture, and that means that anywhere you've touched this plastic where you will have left a little bit of grease or a little bit of moisture from your fingers, the super glue will be attracted to that, sit on it and dry. The correct stuff to use for gluing in plastic is canopy glue. Now, canopy glue is something from the plastic kit model aircraft world. It's actually a sort of PVA, I think. The important thing is it's not attracted to moisture in the same way super glue is. It will stick most things, and the important thing is it dries really, really clear. Stick a little bit on the corner of your modelling board, and I just like to dip the edges of the plastic. I'm not going to go mad and try and cover the whole thing. This is the fiddly bit. Drop it into the telephone box with the tweezers, push it against where it's supposed to be stuck, holding it with the back of the tweezers, just rub my finger along the areas where any glue's showing. But this then left upside down will set, and that's essentially it. Little bit of tidying up, stick a bit more plastic in, and as they say in all the best kids TV shows, here's one I did earlier. I've actually not used the etched logos this time. I managed to find a pack of, I think it's Fox Transfers, did some water slide transfers for the logos, which I thought just looked a little bit better than the etched telecom logos. But there you have it, one little scene with a modern KX100 telephone box in, ideal, and doesn't that just say 1985?